Love
to him. See, officer, I'm not finished.
Hello, sir. I'm Officer Calloway. I'm here to...
I didn't see nothing. I don't know nothing.
Right.
Cheers.
Granddad really didn't know anything about the break-ins, but his unwillingness to talk with the police is a common trait with black people. It's no secret that black people are culturally inclined against snitching.
Hey, I ain't seen nothing.
Hell no!
Man, fuck your mama.
But recently, what was once an unwritten rule about snitching has become a full-blown stop snitching movement, complete with merchandising. Take the murder of 19-year-old Jermaine LoJack Walker, who was shot during a street basketball tournament in the middle of a summer afternoon in front of at least 300 eyewitnesses. Nobody even called the cops. They all just went home. But despite the cultural stigma against it, a whopping 1 in 12 black men in poor neighborhoods is an active informant.
You damn right, Mr. Police, man. I saw the whole thing.
That means every party, every cookout, every wedding probably has someone secretly working as an informant.
Police brutality, just like the mutilation of black bodies in cinema, is absolutely necessary for the mental, psychological, the unconscious coherence of the rest of the world. Police brutality, just like the mutilation of black bodies in cinema, is absolutely necessary for the mental, the psychological, the unconscious coherence of the rest of the world.
Context of White Supremacy, Gus T Renegade in for another program to share constructive information on racism, white supremacy, what it is and how it works. Thank you everyone for tuning into the broadcast. Hope we're not wasting time. Tell listeners consistently, if you're not getting helpful information, please tune in to another broadcast, come up with your own books, films, anything. We do not want black people, non-white people, wasting time. Again, I want to thank a loyal listener in Georgia. She recommended our guest for today's program. I think she said she heard our guest on a different program, perhaps, but she thought she had constructive information and made a great recommendation. I thoroughly enjoyed the book and hope you all will appreciate the information in this broadcast as well. Before we get started, I want to read a portion from the book. Just kind of keep this in mind, nice way to frame the conversation. This is from page 103. It's from the chapter, Snitching in the Hood. And it's talking about the greater prevalence of black informants, or just informants that happen to be black, in black residential areas. First, there are more criminal informants in these communities than anywhere else. In some neighborhoods, many more. This fact alone has significance for extended families and social networks. Second, pervasive snitching exacerbates certain kinds of crime, worsening the very neighborhood conditions that law enforcement is trying to remedy. And third, the widespread use of criminal informants alters the role of the police, their interactions with suspects, as well as their relationships with residents. This kind of undermining of the social fabric of an area. I want you to kind of keep that in mind as we discuss tonight's book. The book is titled Snitching, Criminal Informants and the Erosion of American Justice. The author, she is a professor of law at Loyola University. She's a member of the American Law Institute, an award-winning scholar and nationally recognized expert on snitching in the criminal justice system. Our guest Professor Alexandra Natapoff. Professor Natapoff, are you with us?
I am. Thanks so much for having me.
Outstanding. Thank you for taking some of your time to speak with us this evening. For folks who might not have read your book, and also check out the blog, it's linked in the description. www.snitching.org. You can check out the blog and get additional information. For folks who have not read some of your material, can you kind of give them a little bit of background information about yourself?
Of course. First, I'd like to thank your Georgia listener for helping you invite me to the show. I'm very pleased to be here. I said I'm a professor of law at Loyola Law School, Los Angeles. I've been a professor for about 7 or 8 years. Prior to that, I was an assistant federal public defender in Baltimore, Maryland. And before that, I did, as an attorney, I worked with a lot of community organizations in Baltimore as well. So I learned about snitching, about the use of criminal informants in many different contexts. In the neighborhood in which I lived, the folks who I worked with in Baltimore, and then, of course, as an attorney in the criminal justice system, the federal criminal justice system, where I saw how pervasive the use of informants and cooperation was. And so I've been researching this subject since I was lucky enough to enter into the academy and have the opportunity to do research on it. So that's kind of how I came to the subject. If I might clarify and share some information with your listeners at the outset, the book is entitled Snitching, and I want to be clear about what I mean by that. The book is about a very specific thing. It is about the deals that criminal suspects or criminal offenders cut with the government, and, of course, the deals that the government cuts with suspected offenders, in which information is traded for benefits. And the book is largely about the benefit of leniency, the dropped charge, the shorter sentence, the ability to walk away from an arrest or to avoid criminal prosecution. And I need to start by clarifying because, of course, the term snitching has many meanings for many people. And I'll be glad to talk about that later in the show, and we can talk about all the meanings that the term snitching has acquired over time and in different communities. But the book is about a public policy, the public policy of trading guilt for information. And the reason the book is about that is because, in my view, we cannot understand the criminal system and we cannot understand people's reactions to the idea of snitching, of informants, unless we confront just how pervasive this public policy is, how deeply it defines the way America runs its criminal system, how pervasive it is in poor, high-crime communities where many, many people are facing arrest and prosecution for drug-related offenses. And so it is this public policy of trading away guilt for information or cooperation, often in secret, often without any records or anybody, any scrutiny or judicial or public scrutiny. It's this phenomenon that the book is really about. And I talk about how this choice, this public policy choice that the American criminal system has made, and particularly has made over the past 20 years, which has seen an explosion of the use of these deals, how it affects our perceptions of justice, how it affects our perceptions of police, how police and prosecutors operate, how it works in prison, how it affects communities and families and individuals. So, and I realize that your listeners may have other definitions of snitching in their minds or in their own usage, and that's fine. I'm very happy to talk about them. But the book is about a very particular version of informant use. One, because it is under the control, of course, of the government, that I think is particularly important. It's a public policy that has been validated and used for decades now. And so, in my view, the government needs to take responsibility for its consequences.
I hope folks who consistently tune into this program pick that out from the onset, the importance of definitions and terms. Also, if you were listening carefully, your alarm also should have went off anytime that you hear enforcement officers or white people in general talking about doing things off the record so that there's no paper trail. Ears should be, you should be listening closely. If you would like to clear up confusion just to make sure everybody got it, could you give what you mean when you say snitching one more time just so everybody's on the same page with your definition?
Of course, and we can come back to it, throughout the program for folks who are joining us as we go along. But I define snitching in the book as a deal between the government and a criminal suspect or offender in which information is traded for leniency, for the ability to avoid arrest or a criminal charge or to obtain a shorter sentence or some other kind of benefit. And so under this definition, we're not talking, for example, about a citizen who calls 911 because that person is not getting a benefit. They're not getting a benefit to themselves in their own criminal case as a result of sharing information. We're not talking, for example, about whistleblowers who give information about the organization they work in to uncover corruption or some other criminal activity. We're not, and in addition, there are many informants in American law enforcement who work solely for money, and they raise many of the same problems of reliability and lack of control and accountability that criminal snitches do. But the book is not primarily about them either. It is primarily about the trade in guilt. And the reason that the book is about that is because I think it's such a fundamental decision for a government to say that guilt is negotiable, that our criminal system is going to run largely on negotiations over guilt, that we will trade it away for information, that if you are useful to the government, that you may escape punishment, that the victims of a crime may never be vindicated because the offender with the information was valuable to the government. We see that all the time. And that it changes our perception, our understanding of what guilt means. When the criminal justice system imposes guilt on someone, we don't know if it's for what they really did. We don't know if it's negotiated. We don't know if people who did the same or worse things got off scot-free because of the negotiation. In effect, we're looking not at a system of even-handed justice, but a system of deals, a market in which people with information and the government who wields the most power are entering into negotiations over what guilt will mean. And to me, this is a fundamental weakness and flaw of our criminal system. We shouldn't be sending the message that guilt can be negotiated, particularly when our criminal system is so harsh. When it does mete out punishment, it does so heavily in ways that destroy people's lives and families and communities. And then to turn around and say, oh, but if you had information or if you were valuable, maybe we would be willing to cut a deal. That's insulting to the people who suffer most greatly from the criminal system's excesses. So I think that the focus on the trade in guilt is particularly important and deserved a book-long treatment, which is what I tried to do.
Alexandra Natapoff, the book, again, Snitching, Criminal Informants and the Erosion of American Justice. Before I go to my co-host, you are a white woman. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This program, I thought that was great. This will be a great program because I learned a lot from your book, but I have a slight disagreement. We'll get to see how significant it is. You talked, and I thought it was great, you talked about how important it is to understand the pervasive nature of snitching, according to your definition, this trading guilt for lenience, that how this is rampant in the criminal justice system. Sentencing, the whole process is defined in some way by this snitching. I would say this whole process, the criminal justice system, sentencing, the entire planet, everything that's happening with regards to people, if you do not understand racism, white supremacy, what it is and how it works, everything else you understand will confuse you. And I would say white supremacy, really, racism, white supremacy is at the core of this book. I, too, am very careful about terms. I have the same definition for racism and white supremacy. I use them as synonyms. The definition that I use is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you believe that such a system exists, and do you think that definition is accurate?
Well, let me answer it this way. I might ask you what you mean by a system. If what you mean is that it's intentional, that every white person intentionally engages in the kind of abuse and subjugation that our criminal system engages in every day, then I may not agree with you. But if what you mean is that the effect of the way that our institutions of governance, and in particular criminal justice, have developed, their history, a history that is deeply rooted in racism and segregation and racial inequality, if what you mean is that the effect of those institutions is to consistently maintain abuse and subjugation, and I would add the destruction of dignity of people of color, then I would agree with you. Because we can see, and as I try to highlight and explain in the book, that there are many features of the criminal system that on paper look neutral, that the law as written looks neutral, that law enforcement tactics, as they're described by law enforcement and as they're supported by many well-meaning people, look as if they're racially neutral. But when we look at how these rules and laws are actually enforced, how they are enforced differently in different communities and different institutions, how they are understood differently when they are deployed in different contexts against different people, then we can see that the effect of these policies, which otherwise look neutral, is to disproportionately harm in the neighborhoods that I'm writing about, for the most part, African Americans, black people, but as you say, any disadvantaged, subjugated people of color. One of you mentioned at the outset and in the introduction to this show, you read an excerpt from the book, and if it's all right, I'd like to expand on it a little bit more. Could I hold for just the definition? I want to get the definition, and then I would love for you to expound on that excerpt. With regards to the definition, when I say system, I mean a set of rules that govern conduct, an organized way of doing things that's supposed to produce a precise result. You said the net effect is not neutral. Non-white people are being mistreated here. That's the net effect. And my definition, I didn't say anything about intentionality. I think at the end of the day, it's not really relevant. The default is not set to neutral, where everyone is going to be treated correctly. The default setting is racism, white supremacy, where non-white people will be mistreated by the most powerful white people. I think white people collectively have more power than non-white people collectively, and I think that's true
worldwide. And I think the reason that is because that is the product of a system of white supremacy. Does that make sense? Do you think that's accurate?
Well, it's certainly accurate in the sense that the criminal system is made up of rules and laws that are products, as you say, of a long history of the exercise of power. And one of the great challenges that we see, I'm a criminal law scholar, I'm also an attorney myself, one of the great challenges we see in criminal law scholarship, the effort to analyze and understand and take apart the criminal system, is to ask, how is it that a system whose rules are look neutral, right? So 70 years ago, the rules of the criminal system were not neutral. They explicitly criminalized black people for conduct that was not criminal for white people. Of course, the criminal system was a famous pillar of Jim Crow, of slavery. It has a long and disastrous history in this country. Criminal laws that were facially not neutral. They were openly designed to treat African Americans and white people differently. That is no longer the case. If you read the criminal code, you will never see a law that says black people should be treated differently from white people. And so one of the challenges of criminal scholarship and sociology and criminology is to explain how it is that we have purged the formal law of open race discrimination, and yet the system still functions, as you say, as a means of subjugating and disadvantaging non-white people. And one of the contributions, I hope, of this book is that it delves into the ways that the criminal law actually works, beyond the rules that are on the paper, the way it operates between different actors in the criminal system, so that we can see how the actual dynamic and the wielding of power and the wielding of these rules gives us the unjust results that we have.
Wow. Context of white supremacy. I want to catch my co-host to see if she has questions, but I definitely want to make sure that you have time to respond to that excerpt, because I thought that was a really important part of the book. Justice, if you are there and you have some questions for Professor Natapoff, your line is open. Please go right ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
Why do white people keep information from non-white people?
Well, I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that question. I can certainly say a large part of this book is devoted to the secrecy that characterizes the criminal system, and the secrecy in particular that has characterized the use of criminal informants and how destructive that has been to black communities, to people in the criminal system, to people who have suffered from the policies associated with the use of criminal informants. We have seen that because the use of informants has become such a central part of how crimes are investigated, how deals are cut, how the government makes decisions not only about what kinds of investigations to engage in, but which individuals to charge with crimes and which ones not to charge with crimes, who to reward, who to forgive, and who to go after. Much of that information has been kept secret, has been kept off the record. And I trace in the chapter that's entitled Secret Justice, I trace the various rules and history and practices that have grown up around this extremely secretive and off-the-record practice of using criminal informants. One of the important features of this public policy is that the Supreme Court has been very solicitous of the government's asserted need to keep information secret. When the government argues, for example, that it needs to be able to keep the identities of its criminal informants secret to protect them, for example, from threats, from witness intimidation, or to protect the integrity of an investigation, or to permit information gathering to go on, the court has been increasingly sympathetic to that argument. And as a result, the government has been excused from many of the rules that would otherwise operate to permit the public, to permit defendants to get information about these practices. So secrecy is a very important part, and in my view, a very destructive part of the use of criminal informants, and it has affected many other features of the criminal system, even above and beyond cases in which criminal informants are used. So, for example, one of the phenomena I describe in the book is the modern trend in court administration and management is to make court records, public records. Of course, most court records are public records. If you want to walk into a court file room, and see any public case, you can ask the clerk for it, and they're supposed to give it to you. The modern trend has been to make public court records and files available digitally over the Internet. More and more courts are moving to electronic filing. Cases are kept track of electronically, and it's very easy through public Internet mechanisms to get information about court cases and court files. In the criminal arena, there has been resistance to that kind of public access to court records, and it has centered around informants. It has centered around the government's assertion that making the criminal records publicly available in this way will expose cooperating informants to retaliation and threat and intimidation. And as a result, numerous courts have responded by keeping all criminal records out of the digitized Internet available system because of the worry that in those cases in which there are cooperating witnesses, people will be able to find out just by getting on the Internet. So in effect, this phenomenon of snitching, which is not traditionally treated as central to the way the American system does justice, in fact is affecting the entire way that courts are thinking about whether records that are public by law should be easily accessible in ways that other court records are. So it's having a widespread effect in all kinds of areas that are very difficult to see. And so one of my efforts in the book was to pull together all the pieces, all the different places in which the use of criminal informants is slowly, quietly, but surely changing the way that courts and law enforcement officers and judges and attorneys are changing their practices to adjust to this reality.
Can you please give some more information of how white people keep information from non-white people?
Well, again, that's a very general question. I can certainly talk more about the mechanisms by which the criminal system, which is my area of expertise, keeps records secret.
Sorry about that. I mean specific examples.
Well, the example I just gave of the court keeping what would otherwise be public records off the digitally available court system. In a particular criminal case, a defendant, and of course a large percentage of our criminal justice population is African American or otherwise people of color, the rules of disclosure and discovery are meant to provide defendants with information about their cases so that they can defend themselves. And the Supreme Court has ruled in a series of very famous cases. The most famous case is called Brady. Some of you may have heard the term Brady material. The Supreme Court ruled that if the government has information that is exculpatory, meaning that it would tend to forgive or tend to suggest that a defendant was not guilty, if the government has that information in its possession and it's prosecuting a defendant, it has to turn over that information to the defendant. And if the government doesn't turn that information over, it's a constitutional violation. It's a violation of the defendant's constitutional rights to due process. As part of that constitutional right, the court decided another case called Giglio, in which it decided that when the government uses an informant, a criminal informant, against a defendant, so a defendant is charged based on information from an informant, and the government intends to use that informant as a witness against that defendant, the defendant is entitled to what is called impeachment information about that informant, which in simple terms is just any information that the government has that might suggest the informant is lying. The biggest class of information like that, of course, is the nature of the deal itself. What promises did the government make to this informant to get them to be an informant, to get them to be a witness, to get them to provide information against the defendant? And so this class of information, which again is a very famous, well-established set of constitutional rights for defendants, it is the defendant's central protection if an informant has come up with information against them, because the defendant is constitutionally entitled to know what benefit that informant is supposed to be getting. Well, just a few years ago, the Supreme Court decided a very important case called United States versus Ruiz, in which it went back to this idea that defendants need information about whether informants are lying in order to defend themselves. And the court decided that defendants who decided to go to trial were indeed entitled to this information. But if a defendant decided to plead guilty, then they were not entitled to this information, that the information could remain secret, that the government could not disclose it. And this is an extremely important decision because the vast majority of all criminal cases in this country do not go to trial. 95% of all felony cases in this country are resolved by plea bargain or by plea, not by trial. So in that one decision, in effect, the Supreme Court decided that 95% of defendants in this country would not be entitled to information about the informant or the snitch who gave information about them that led to their arrest and prosecution. And so that's a mechanism in one case where the Supreme Court effectively drew a veil over a vast amount of information and declared that it could be kept secret. There's an additional consequence, not only for defendants of this kind of secrecy, but if a defendant cannot find out that information about his or her own case, it means the public will never learn about it either. Because the criminal system only opens its files, or I shouldn't say only, but almost only ever opens its files in the context of litigation. If you want to know how the government prosecuted or investigated a case, it is the defendant in the case that has the most access to that information if they go to trial. And so because defendants, under these rules, will in most cases be unable to get that information, it means the public is not entitled to that information either. And so the entire system and the entire process of using and rewarding informants and using them to construct cases has become even more secret as a result of this kind of Supreme Court decision.
What are some ways non-white people can get information from white people in the criminal justice system?
Well, the main way, as I just said, that we can get information from the criminal system is through cases. And it's very, very difficult because the pressures on criminal defendants to plead guilty and therefore to deprive themselves of the ability to get all the information from the government that they could if they went to trial. The pressure to plead guilty is immense. Sentences are extremely high. The phenomenon of what we sometimes call the trial penalty, the fact that if you lose at trial, if you exercise your constitutional right to a trial, you're likely to get a longer sentence, a much longer sentence than if you plead guilty. That's a huge incentive to people to plead guilty, even, as has been documented by numerous scholars, even if you're innocent, because the risk of going to trial and facing a very long sentence is extremely high. And so the criminal system is designed to produce information through the mechanism of a trial, and it's a very poor mechanism for producing public information. The other ways that people can get information from the criminal system are not directly related to criminal cases. For example, the Freedom of Information Act is a federal statute that provides public access to certain kinds of information. We've seen a number of cases in which criminal defendants were charged and prosecuted and convicted based on information from informants. And in the course of their own case, the defendants did not get all the information about the informants that existed. After they were convicted, they filed what we call a Freedom of Information Act request. It's sometimes abbreviated as FOIA, a FOIA request to the government to get files from other agencies, from the DEA or the FBI or the Secret Service about these informants, and turned up new information that they didn't know at trial. These are often hard-fought legal battles. The government is very reluctant to give up this information, and we see in court decisions how difficult it is. But this has been a mechanism for revealing more information than the criminal system would usually relinquish. One very central way that we get information about the criminal system that we would not otherwise have is from journalists. Some of the greatest exposés, the information that we have about the way the criminal system works, and in particular about how the phenomenon of criminal informants work, is through plain old-fashioned journalism. Journalists who go behind the story, who go behind the case and dig up information. I'm thinking in particular of one article that was published, I think it was in May of last year, in Reason magazine, and it was about a woman named Ann Collum and her 3 sons who lived down in Louisiana, and they were charged and convicted of running a crack cocaine ring. It was alleged that they ran one of the largest crack cocaine rings in the area. They were entirely innocent. The charges were baseless. But what the case revealed was that there was a ring of prison snitches, of jailhouse snitches, who worked in the local federal penitentiary, buying and selling information within the prison to each other about people who were of interest to the police. So the Collins had been, one of the Collins boys had been arrested. His name popped up, and he became of interest to this prison snitch ring. And the ring they would create files and folders containing photographs and information and reports about innocent people. And then inmates would buy these files and learn the information and then go to law enforcement, to the prosecutor, to their police handler, and claim that they had firsthand information about crimes committed by these individuals as a way of trying to get a deal themselves, to try to work off their own sentences. In this particular case, the Ann Collum case, the prosecutor had intended to use over 20 of these prison jailhouse snitches to make the case against the Collins. They had a witness list that included over 20 of these jailhouse snitches. And this was the basis of the case. I think in the end, maybe 16 actually testified. So these prisoners testified that they had bought drugs or had information about this crack cocaine ring run by the Collins. The Collins were convicted. They were in prison awaiting sentencing, facing decades of their life behind bars. And the only reason we know about this story is because of two accidents, not because the criminal system had mechanisms for uncovering the deceit, uncovering the misinformation, because, as we've been discussing this whole time, the criminal system in this arena is extremely secretive and not transparent at all, but because of two accidents. The first accident was that one of the Collins sons shared a cell with another inmate who knew about the ring, and they became friends. And so the cellmate felt sorry for his new friend, and so he gave him information about what was actually going on. The other accident was another inmate who had tried to buy information from the prison snitch ring. His girlfriend he'd given his girlfriend $2,200 on the outside to purchase one of these files, and he had been ripped off. He never got the file. And he was so angry that he wrote a letter to the prosecutor asking that the other prison inmate be prosecuted for theft, for having stolen his $2,200. And it was only because of these two accidents, because two people came forward and gave information about the ring in this way, that the Collins case could be seen for what it was, which was a fabrication. And when the information came to the attention of the court, they dismissed the charges, and the Collins went free. But the fact that, and it was then a journalist who wrote this story and about the story and made it public and revealed some more of the details of what had actually gone on. But the criminal system is not designed to make this kind of information public. It is not designed to check this kind of behavior. It's designed to keep such information confidential for the reasons that I discussed before. That law enforcement wants to keep its informants confidential so they can use them in secrecy, so that they can have ongoing investigations, and so that they can, of course, maintain better control over the kinds of investigations and deals that they engage in. So it is very difficult to wrest information from the criminal system, and the ways that we have are partial. And so one of the things that I acknowledge, frankly, in the book is that I've gathered as much information as I could find on the public record, and even I know that it's incomplete, that the stories and the anecdotes and the cases that I found are at best a partial picture of what actually goes on in the streets, in the neighborhoods, in the prisons, and in court. And so one of my recommendations in the last chapter, or the second to last chapter of the book, is a series of recommended reforms that I think would improve the operation of the criminal system in this arena. And the very first one is that the system needs to stop being so secretive. It needs to become more transparent. Defendants need to have better access to the information about informants in their cases. And perhaps even more importantly, the public needs more information about how the criminal system is really being operated, because it's the public, and communities and neighborhoods and families, that pay the price when these policies go wrong.
On this radio program, The C.O.W.S, we've talked about Homeland Security. If you know anything about Homeland Security, just so the listeners, myself, and Gus can get more informed, what is Homeland Security, and what does Homeland Security do?
That is not my area of expertise. I'm sorry, I can't answer that question.
How do you think your book is constructive in working against racism, white supremacy?
Well, my hope for the book is twofold. in that regard. One is that, as I was saying earlier, is that our criminal system behaves in ways that are racially unfair, often off the radar.
Oh, you broke our agreement. We made an agreement not to say fair.
I apologize. I apologize. That the ways that the criminal system is racially discriminatory or burdensome or harmful to African Americans is often hard to see. It's secretive. It takes place in ways that are not well documented, and that by uncovering the real workings of how the criminal system operates, from police to prosecutors to courts to rules to the way courts share or do not share information, the pervasiveness of the use of criminal informants, which I'll get back to in a minute. I think it's important to try to outline, even though the government does not give us data on how many criminal informants there are, I think we can extrapolate from what we do know about the scale of the phenomenon. But this is not information that the public has. And because, in my view, the use of criminal informants has been so damaging to black neighborhoods, to poor, high-crime neighborhoods, in which the use of informants is pervasive, and it's a phenomenon that that the public discourse pays almost no attention to. One of my hopes for the book was that by exposing the workings of this public policy and the harm that it inflicts, particularly on young black men, but on their families and communities, that it would fight and help fight against the race imbalances in our criminal system. So first, we can't fight it until we uncover it. And so one of the goals of the book is to uncover what's really going on and the policies behind what's really going on. The second is that once we uncover how the criminal system works and the harms that it inflicts, it's only then that we can protest it or try to change it. And as I said, the second to last chapter of the book is devoted to some of the kinds of changes that I think can be made in the criminal system that would start to alleviate some of the harms that the use of criminal informants and snitching has inflicted. And lest this seem, too idealistic or pie in the sky, I would point out that many states now have just begun to reconsider the laws of using criminal informants. They're reconsidering how informants can be used as witnesses. A number of states have introduced legislation that would expand the definition of informant use, that would require more accountability from the government before it cuts these deals. There has also been a move to create more protection for vulnerable people who are pressured by police into becoming informants. The flip side of informant use, of course, is that while criminal informants can inflict harm on others, they may be unreliable, they may lead to wrongful convictions of innocent people or to violence. At the same time, many criminal informants themselves are vulnerable people. They are powerless in the face of police pressure, as are so many people in the criminal justice system. They may have substance abuse issues, or they may lack the tools and the resources to stand up for themselves. And many people become criminal informants without the protection of legal advice or counsel or resources, and so they become informants although they don't want to. And in Florida, about a year and a half ago, new legislation was passed, the first in the country, to try to begin to address this problem, the problem that all too often police may put pressure on vulnerable people who shouldn't be made informants. They shouldn't be put in the dangerous situations that informants are placed in. Much of this reform has been driven by families who saw their family members, particularly their children, harmed by the way the criminal system works, harmed by snitching policies because their children may have become informants, or because their children were convicted based on the word of a lying informant. And these families put pressure on the legislatures to change the law. So the law can't be changed if people don't have information about how it works. But once we know that these are the dynamics of the law and the criminal system, then we can start a public dialogue about how the law should be different.
That will be all for now. Go ahead, Gus.
Context of white supremacy. Again, the blog, if you want to check out more information for Alexandra Natapoff, the blog is snitching.org, www.snitching.org. The book, Snitching, Criminal Informants and the Erosion of American Justice. This was a 2009 publication. I have a request, Professor Natapoff. If we could make this a dialogue for the latter portion that you'll be with us, would that be acceptable? I want to talk about your book, but as I said, I have a disagreement, I think, so I would prefer if we could have more of a conversation about that. Is that acceptable?
Of course.
I'm sorry?
I said, of course. Yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Groovy. I was listening while you were responding to some of Justice's questions, and when I heard the term criminal system, criminal justice system, criminal system, I thought, man, if we replace criminal system with the system of white supremacy, this makes total sense. Even going back in, it totally supports everything that I said at the very beginning of the program. And I want people to keep in mind that sound clip. That was Dr. Frank Wilderson. He was on the program earlier this week, professor at UC Irvine, where he talked about the importance, the necessity of brutalizing black people for the sanity of the planet. And he explained why on the program earlier this week. And I also want people to keep in mind the book, Norm Stamper, Breaking Rank. He was a guest on this program, and he talked about how this former chief of police in Seattle, Washington, and he talked about how white people are afraid of black people and how enforcement officers, police officers, they are afraid of black people. The darker the black person, the more afraid they are. This is what racism, white supremacy means. And I was even thinking my definition, I didn't say anything about intentionality, but I do believe that the white people who practice racism, white supremacy, they are addicted to that. They have a system that is designed to produce results like what happened to the Column family. In fact, that not having information, not having a record of these procedures and what happened with these informants, that's a big part of what you write about in the book. This is done on purpose. And I also want folks to keep in mind, I'm saying all this, Douglas Blackman, author of Slavery by Another Name, he was a guest on this program. Robert Perkinson, author of Texas Tough, The Rise of the American Prison Empire, guest on this program. Norm Stamper, guest on the program, where I think it's pretty obvious the prison system and the damage that they do to black people. So I think this book about snitching, it really just evidences, further supports that we are in a system of white supremacy that is designed to do this sort of damage to black people, non-white people. And I think I could flip randomly through your book to support that point. I was going to talk about the Column family, but I want to rewind and go back to page 1 of your book to talk about 92-year-old Katherine Johnston. Can you tell our audience the importance of Katherine Johnston? And if you can throw in, is this a black person? How this relates to snitching? Do you think it supports what I'm saying?
Yes, sure. So Katherine Johnston was a 92-year-old black woman, grandmother, who lived in Atlanta, Georgia, who was killed by 2 police officers who broke into her home with a no-knock warrant. A no-knock warrant is a warrant in which the police are given authority not to knock on the door and ask permission, but to break into a home to gain access to the home. And the reason that the officers were breaking into Mrs. Johnston's home were because of the use of informants. In fact, the use of multiple informants and informant practices that are deeply entrenched in the ways that the criminal system operates, its sloppiness, and its tendency to harm black people and poor people and vulnerable people the most. So the two officers in this terrible case earlier that day had stopped a man named Fabian Sheets, who was a drug dealer and known to them to be a drug dealer in Atlanta. But they had let him go, and they had let him go because he traded them a piece of information. He told them that he knew that there was a kilogram of cocaine at a particular address, 933 Neal Street, which is a street in a black neighborhood in Atlanta. And so the police believed him. And I'll come back to the role of race and assumptions in law enforcement and sloppiness in law enforcement in a minute, but I just want to note that when Fabian Sheets gave this tip to the police in order for him to walk away and escape arrest, the police believed him. So Sheets walked away, and the police went to get a warrant for the address that Sheets had given them, 933 Neal Street. The problem was that there are rules in Atlanta, as there are in some jurisdictions, that if you want to use an informant to get a warrant, the informant has to be registered. It has to be an informant that the police already know is reliable, and Sheets wasn't one of their registered informants. So the police officers lied in their warrant application, and they said that they had gotten information from an anonymous confidential informant. They called him a reliable confidential informant who, according to them in this affidavit, sworn under oath to the court, had gone to 933 Neal Street, had purchased drugs there, and had seen a large quantity of drugs in that house. So they made up that information in order to get a warrant, and they took it to the court, and the court issued the warrant based on the police officers' assertions. So now they had their warrant, and they went to 933 Neal Street, and because it was a no-knock warrant, which is issued in emergencies or when the police and the courts believe that people may destroy evidence, they pried the burglar bars off the windows, and they broke down the front door. Well, Mrs. Johnston, who lived there, 92 years old, thought she was being burglarized, and so she got her gun out. And as a result of that, the police shot her dead. After they shot Mrs. Johnston, they searched the house, and there was no cocaine there. Fabian Sheets had lied to them. The tip that they had relied on to do all this was a bad tip. And so now they were in a position where they had lied in an affidavit to the court to get a warrant for a house in which there were no drugs, and they had killed a 92-year-old woman. And so they turned to another snitch, a professional snitch named Alex White, who had been on their payroll for years. His typical pay was $30, a $30 voucher for tips that led to arrests or warrants. And they called Alex White, and they told him that he needed to say everything that they had said in the warrant affidavit to back them up. In effect, they found an informant to say what they had invented to cover their story. And under normal circumstances, this would have worked because informants will often say what police tell them to say, and Alex White would have gotten $30, and nobody would have ever known this story. But Alex White didn't. He said that he wouldn't do that. And because he wouldn't back them up, the story came to light, and the officers were prosecuted and convicted. And there was a major investigation of Atlanta police practices that uncovered the sort of widespread use of criminal informants and to try to get warrants and the dependence on informants to get warrants.
Professor Natapoff, I just want to use this as a teaching moment for non-white people who are listening. I just want you all to think. Just take a moment. Think about what you just heard that happened to this 92-year-old black female that under normal circumstances, we probably wouldn't even know about this. That's why I said I don't do shows about Oscar Grant and stuff, because this type of stuff happens all the time. We just never hear about it. Now, I want you all to just think, if Katherine Johnson was a white person, would this event have happened? Professor Natapoff, do you have a thought?
I do. I actually like to step back a little bit. One of the I can't take credit for this insight. It was one of the discussions that went on around when this case came to light. If Katherine Johnston had been a young black male, then we also might not have known about it, because it would have been much easier for the police officers. I'm sorry, I apologize, I forgot one piece of the story. So the police officers, when they didn't find any cocaine, they planted some marijuana in the house, a small amount of marijuana that they had picked up. And because it was Mrs. Johnston, nobody believed that could have been true of her. But, of course, if it had been a young black male, the officers might well have gotten away with their cover story, and we still wouldn't know about it. Because it was Mrs. Johnston, because it was so obvious that she must have been innocent, there was a congressional hearing. As I said, there was a federal investigation. But many people at the time pointed out that, again, it was just happenstance. This tragedy happened to occur to someone who people would recognize that had to be innocent. There have been a number of studies, in fact, of similar wrongful SWAT team warrant executions, violent executions where innocent people in their homes have been shot. And they often take place in black neighborhoods or against people who are vulnerable, who cannot defend themselves and cannot defend themselves in the public eye after these wrongful events take place.
Professor Natapoff, that is exactly why I'm exerting this is what the system of white supremacy produces, and I would assert it is consciously designed to produce this. Mr. Graham A. Raymond, he is a writer for the Village Voice. He was here in June of 2010, and he said that there were 500,000 stop and frisks in New York City in, I believe it's 2008. 90% of them, you almost can finish my sentence for me, and 95% of these folks, non-white people, mostly black people, 95% of them were innocent. No arrests, weren't doing anything, just stop and frisked. That's what white supremacy produces. I would even assert this snitching that you're talking about in your book. On page 101, you begin the chapter, Snitching in the Hood. This is a quote from Dr. Jerome Miller. He says, no single tactic of law enforcement has contributed more to violence in the inner city than the practice of seeding the streets with informers and offering deals to snitches. Relying on informers threatens and eventually cripples much more than criminal enterprise. It erodes whatever social bonds exist in families, in the community, or on the streets. Loyalties, which in the past years kept violence within bounds, I would assert as a non-white person in a system of white supremacy, this is the reason that we have this pervasive use of snitching. I would argue it's this reason to create this, I think you have an article, inter-minority conflict, to create this chaos, confusion amongst black people, non-white people, to create situations like what happened with the C.O.W.S family. And I want to, again, just read a little bit of your book. This is on page 71. You're writing, Ann C.O.W.S and her 3 sons, they were wrongfully convicted for allegedly running one of the largest crack cocaine operations in Louisiana. This is that coded language, crack cocaine, got to know this is most likely a black person. The C.O.W.S family served 4 months in prison awaiting sentencing before all charges were dismissed. Their wrongful convictions were based on fabricated testimony obtained from a ring of jailhouse informants who bought and sold information about the C.O.W.S family inside the local federal prison. You talked about this earlier. I'm just emphasizing the point. And to further hammer that home, this sort of treatment is not supposed to happen to white people. This is a tragedy. This is totally incorrect and immediately addressed if it happened to a white person, such as the case in your book. I'm just going to your book, page 1. You want to tell them what happened to Mrs. Hoffman? I'm not looking at the first name. Do you want to tell them what happened to her and how this supports my point, I think?
Sure. So Rachel Hoffman was a young woman who lived in Florida, and she was arrested for possessing a small amount of marijuana and some I think it was 5 pills. That they might have been ecstasy, they might have been something else. And she the police threatened her. They said that she would go to prison if she didn't become an informant. And so she became an informant without telling her attorney, without telling her parents. She became an informant for the police, and the police sent her on a sting operation to go buy a large amount of drugs and a gun. And during that sting, she was killed. And this is one of the examples that I used earlier of a case in which her family, and her family is a white family, and she herself was white. Her family raised a ruckus about the fact that their daughter had been killed, and sued the police and lobbied the legislature. And as a result, Florida passed the law that I mentioned earlier that creates an obligation on police departments to create regulations which had never existed before. When police are deciding whether somebody should be turned into an informant or not, and it requires police to consider things like their age, whether they have a substance abuse problem, whether they have committed a violent offense, whether the work that as an informant that they're being asked to do involves any danger or violence. And so your point being that
they don't do this for black people.
This kind of harm happens to black people, to poor people, to people who don't have the resources to speak up for themselves or to be listened to all the time. And it took the tragic death of Rachel Hoffman, whose parents did have the resources, who were white, who had access to the legislature, who had access to the media, to speak out about their daughter's death, to get listened to have the ability to change the law. This is one example of course, a much larger phenomenon in the criminal system. Our criminal system is designed as an adversarial process, which means that the weaker party will always suffer in our adversarial process. The government and the defendant are not equally situated. The only mechanism that our system provides to equalize that imbalance of power at all is the right to counsel, the constitutional right to assistance of counsel. And, of course, when the government charges a person with a crime, the state is obligated to appoint a lawyer. Because our country does not adequately fund the defense bar because public defenders don't have the resources or the time to take the care and attention to litigate every case that they have. Some public defenders have hundreds, even thousands of cases in a caseload. In fact, we do not have an adversarial system. We have a system in which the government wields most of the power, and defendants, largely defendants of color, defendants who are poor, defendants who are vulnerable, who cannot afford a lawyer and who cannot afford to fully defend themselves, are essentially at the government's mercy. And snitching is, in my view, a window into that phenomenon. It is, in some senses, a more extreme version of the kind of power imbalance that affects the entire criminal process. At 80% of the American criminal justice population cannot afford a lawyer. They're dependent on state-appointed counsel. And so when the state doesn't pay counsel, when it doesn't give them resources, when it gives them hundreds or thousands of cases, we already know what the outcome is going to be because the adversarial system is imbalanced. And snitching reaches even farther back, long before trial, when an informant faces, a potential informant or a suspect or an arrestee is faced by a police officer on the street corner. They're not entitled to a lawyer. When the police officer says, I'm going to lock you up and throw away the key unless you become a snitch, that person is not entitled to legal counsel or protection. They are, in effect, facing the power of the state all by themselves. Our legal system does not compensate for that, except to say that if you are eventually charged with a crime, we're going to give you a lawyer. And we know that that's an ineffective way of equalizing that power imbalance. African American.
I wanted to hop in. I wanted to hop in really quick. You said the snitching is a window into the criminal justice system. Again, I would assert it is a window into the system of white supremacy. And just to go back to Rachel Hoffman, this is page 41. I want you all to really think about this, reading from Professor Natapoff's book. And I want you to keep in mind Katherine Johnston, 92-year-old black female. Keep in mind what happened to her, trying to plant marijuana on her after they killed her in her own home. Now listen to what happened with a white woman, Rachel Hoffman. Hoffman's death elicited public and media sympathy atypical for a criminal informant. ABC News devoted a segment of the show 2020 to her death. Hoffman was described by friends as naive, dainty, and fragile, and experts opined that she should not have been used in such a dangerous operation. Commentators speculated that because she was female, educated, white, and attractive, she did not seem like the kind of criminal offender that people usually associate with drug dealing or other dangerous behavior. Think about that and keep in mind Katherine Johnston, 92-year-old black female. I want to go back to the snitching because, again, I'm asserting this snitching thing is being done purposely in the system of white supremacy to cause confusion and to disrupt black residential areas. I don't want to say communities, but black areas, to cause disruption and conflict amongst black people, non-white people. And you touch on this quite a bit in your book. I just want to read a passage and then hear your thoughts. This is on page 108, Snitching in the Hood, same chapter I read from before. In sum, we simply do not know directly or with any certainty how many people are actually working criminal informants or how many young African American men are under pressure to inform. And the most serious manifestation of the phenomenon will be limited to those neighborhoods with the highest concentration of crime, police presence, and social vulnerability. But we do know that the structure of the penal system and its deep penetration, sexual metaphor, I think, into poor black communities, together with the habits of law enforcement, make it likely that in our most economically distressed neighborhoods, a significant proportion of the young black male population is under heavy governmental pressure to provide information about others, other black people presumably, in order to avoid incarceration. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. It's a subject actually that I've written about for a while in a law review article I published back in 2004, where I started examining this issue of how snitching affected poor black neighborhoods more than, and in a more destructive way than, other neighborhoods and other institutions. And in the introduction, I think it was Justice cited the number, which she got from my book, that 1 in 12 young black men in some of these neighborhoods may be snitching. And I just want to tell you where I got that number from. So, of course, as you read from that paragraph, we don't know how many criminal informants there are or how many people are pressured to become criminal informants because the government doesn't keep those records and isn't obligated to keep those records. I advocate at the end of the book that they should be obligated to keep those records, but in the current situation they're not. But we do know that drug enforcement is disproportionately present in black neighborhoods, that black men are wildly disproportionately arrested for drug offenses compared to white people. We know that black and white people are, from the most neutral studies that we have, use drugs at approximately the same rates. There don't seem to be any difference between black and white habits in drug use, and yet black men are arrested, depending on the city you pick, at 4, 5, 15, sometimes 20, in a few cities as many as 30 or 40 times more for drug offenses than are white offenders. So while we have the same basic underlying behavior, black people are being arrested and prosecuted for drug crimes far more often than white people. And part of this is because drug enforcement is concentrated in neighborhoods where black people live. Well, what that means is that all the practices and rules associated with drug enforcement are therefore also disproportionately focused on black neighborhoods. And one of them is the use of criminal informants. And what I mean by the use of criminal informants is the idea that any drug arrestee is fair game to be pressured.
Oh, you broke our agreement again. Fair game, fair game.
I'm sorry. It's a hard habit to break. I'll do my best. That any drug arrestee can legitimately be pressured into becoming an informant. And so since we know that in some neighborhoods, the studies that have been done pertain to Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, but it's believed that the numbers are comparable in places like Oakland and Detroit and other predominantly African-American cities, that in the poorest neighborhoods where the arrest rates and crime rates are highest, that as many as half of the young men between the ages of 18 and 29 may be under criminal justice supervision at any given time. Half of that population is either on probation or parole or incarcerated at any given time. We know that approximately half of those cases are drug-related, either because these individuals are being arrested for drug possession or drug distribution, or because they're being arrested for crimes that are related to the use of drugs. there are all kinds of theft and violent offenses that are drug-related, related to the drug trade, or more commonly to drug addiction. Well, if half of that population is under criminal justice supervision, and half of them are under supervision for drug-related offenses, and we know that law enforcement routinely pressures drug offenders to cooperate, that means that we can assume that that portion of the people living in that neighborhood are under pressure. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody's snitching. It is one thing to have a police officer lean on you to snitch, and it is another thing to actually do it. And we don't have direct information about how often people who are under pressure to become informants actually say yes. But we do know in the federal system, which is a small slice of the entire criminal system, but one that we have the most data about, we know from the last study that the U.S. Sentencing Commission conducted that half of drug offenders cooperate in some way with the government. Now, the federal system is a little different, and the numbers don't translate perfectly. But if that were true, and as I argue in the book, if it's true that even a quarter of people who are pressured to become informants, that is half the rate of the federal system, if even a quarter of the people who are pressured to cooperate actually do, then that would mean that approximately 1 in 12 individuals in that age group, in those high crime neighborhoods, not in every neighborhood, not everywhere, but in the highest crime neighborhoods with the most drug enforcement and the most arrests, it's quite likely that that high a percentage of people may actually be cooperating. So that's where that number came from. It was an attempt to evaluate the global operation of drug enforcement in neighborhoods on this particular population in light of this policy. And because that's such a high number, it drives home the fact that this is a public policy that disproportionately affects young black men in these communities.
Professor Alexandra Natapoff, Loyola professor of law, again, her book, Snitching, Criminal Informants and the Erosion of American Justice. I just want to read one quick passage really quick before I check the phone lines to see if folks have a question. This is page 108. It's, again, the Snitching in the Hood chapter of the book. Excuse me, I read 108. 107, sorry, flipping back. 107. The implications of this estimate, the estimate in terms of the number of people who are informants, the implications of this estimate are potentially dramatic. In those localized high crime neighborhoods in which approximately half of the black men between the ages of 20 and 29 are under criminal supervision, half of those fall into the high risk snitching group. If as many as 1/4 of those individuals are actually snitching, that would mean that in some of these small neighborhoods, 1 in 16 black men in this age group, or about 6%, may actually be giving the government information at any given time. 6% would be a lot. It would implicate many extended families, apartment complexes, neighborhood events, and church congregations. It would make it likely that someone, maybe more than one someone, in that group or institution or network would have already given information or might actively be trying to find incriminating information about others, and would have the police's ear when he or she does. This is page 107. I'm not reading that to try to promote paranoia amongst anyone listening to the program. I'm just reading it to emphasize I think this is being done purposely to create dissension, conflict, confusion. I think white people know this is part of the result that will happen when you do this sort of thing, get non-white people to give information so that they don't get punished, so that they get lenient. They know this sort of thing will happen, I suspect, and it's being done purposely to promote conflict. The person who dialed in from a blocked number, Did you have a question for Professor Natapoff?
Greetings. Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening to you, Gus Justice and Professor Natapoff.
Good evening.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Professor Natapoff.
Yes, ma'am.
It's a pleasure to hear your voice on the radio. I heard you on the Beth Smith show, and your information was most informative, so I decided to pass it on to Gus so that he can do a program to make your information aware in the community, because apparently people have it confused with the other form of telling information. So they believe that if they were snitched, then sometimes it might not be such a good thing. But we just want to get that information cleared up. I'm glad that you were on the program tonight to give some information. What I wanted to find out from you with this program with snitching, is it predominantly in the communities of color that you find that this information is so high? How about in the white areas? Do you find that there is a problem? For instance, you mentioned with Katherine Johnson, who is right here in Atlanta with me, and the situation with the no-knock warrants. Do you have any statistics to show that this situation is only in the non-white areas, the Latinos, the black area, where they have such a high rate of no-knock warrants issue? And the situation with snitching, is it more so in these communities than they are in the majority white communities in the U.S.?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And again, thank you. Thank you for listening and for the invitation. So, as I said, the government doesn't keep information like this and share information. So it's very hard to know with any certainty how often criminal informants are used. So we're really relying on outside sources, journalists and scholars, or particular tragedies to bring the information to light. The information that Gus and I were just discussing, the rate of drug enforcement and potential informant use in poor black communities, those are extrapolations. We know how drug enforcement works in many black neighborhoods. We know that drug enforcement relies on informants, and so we can safely guess that there is a very high rate of people being pressured to cooperate with the police and give information. We don't have that kind of data. We don't have direct data about informant use for any neighborhood. But here's some information that we do have. There was a project called the San Diego Warrant Project. It was conducted at a California Western Law School several years ago. And they studied San Diego County, which is a racially diverse county in Southern California. And they studied all the warrants issued in one particular year. And they studied the racial disparities of the issuance of warrants and the reliance on warrants to search people's homes. And one of the things they found several things. One is they found that warrants were issued more often for black and Latino households, and that those warrants turned up less incriminating evidence less often than warrants issued for white households. So in effect, the police were getting more warrants for households of color, black and Latino households, but the warrants were they had a lower rate of turning up evidence. It was more likely that when a warrant was actually issued for a white household that there would be drugs, or these were drug warrants, incriminating evidence in the house. So that supports our intuition that these tactics are being used more often in black neighborhoods and Latino neighborhoods than they are in white neighborhoods. What the study also found was that the vast majority of these warrants were based on confidential informants. And while this is not something that the study could prove directly, the authors of the study hypothesized, they guessed, that one of the reasons that might explain why so many warrants were being issued for Black and Latino households was because we know that police disproportionately stop and arrest Black and Latino suspects, that it's more likely that Black and Latino people will be arrested. And so it's more likely that they'll be pressured to give information that could then be used in a warrant. And what we see is that this method of getting information is highly unreliable, that it's turning up, that it's creating warrants for houses in which innocent people live, and that the effect of that is disproportionately visited on the homes and families of Black and Latinos. So while we don't have a lot of direct evidence about particular neighborhoods and the racial disparities, when we do get studies and we do get evidence, it typically supports the conclusion that the use of informants has this racially disproportionate effect and is used in ways that are racially disproportionate.
Get in our last question. Professor Natapoff, she's heading out now. If we can get our last question, if you have a quick one, 2736, last quick question for Professor Natapoff.
Yes, sir. Thanks for taking my call. Greetings to the guests. I guess the one question I wanted to ask, I don't know if you're familiar with a few years back, the fiasco with the witness protection program in Baltimore. And I just, you know, how police officers and departments rely so much on CIs. I guess, could you explain, have you, talked to any, police departments about, I guess, the dynamic of mistrust by, non-white communities towards police officers, because you see that type of dynamic where, they have witness protection for law-abiding citizens and these people are getting, killed, injured, and, but the CIs are usually well taken care of?
So I'm not sure. I don't know the specific case you're talking about. Baltimore has certainly had a long struggle with witness intimidation of just regular, residents of Baltimore being lacking police protection, not only, of course, in the witness protection context, but more generally. In my view, the witness intimidation and the lack of protection for witnesses is part of a larger problem of lack of police protection and security for poor neighborhoods more generally. And so I certainly am familiar with that general issue in Baltimore and elsewhere. And when I'm glad you raised this issue of distrust, because in many ways that is the heart of the phrase and the phenomenon of stop snitching. It's been, discussed all kinds of ways all over the country, the idea that people do not trust the police, that they do not want to share information with the police, even in their own communities when they see people killed or crimes going on, that it doesn't seem that the police are a source of security and safety to people, and so they don't turn to them. And one of the arguments I make in the book is that part of this distrust, and not all of it, of course, this is a historical phenomenon that goes back decades, even centuries, in the history of the relationship of the criminal system to African Americans and to black neighborhoods. But part of the modern phenomenon of distrust of the police has to be understood that people know that police are working with criminal offenders who are continuing to offend, who are getting off from their crimes, and that is part of why people do not trust the police. If I could maybe end with this story, Gus, you asked me at the beginning how I got to start looking at the subject, and one of the ways I started was back now over a decade ago when I was working in Baltimore. As an attorney, I used to teach classes in the evening in some of the community centers, law classes for young people who are interested. And in one of these classes, there was a young boy about 12 years old, and he said to me, so I got a question. So police let dealers stay on the corner because they're snitching. is that legal? Can the police do that? And when I explained to him that it was legal, that the law gives police authority to let drug dealers or any offender remain free if they are cooperating, he and his young friends were disgusted. They said, well, no, the police aren't doing their job. And another one said, so all you got to do is snitch and you can keep on dealing. And it is that perception, that understanding by children as well as adult citizens who realize that these deals are going on undercover, off the record, that, in my view, is an important contributing factor to the kinds of distrust that we see in American cities today between the community and between the police.
Wow. Again, visit the blog, www.snitching.org, and the book, Snitching, Criminal Informants and the Erosion of American Justice. Thoroughly enjoy. Oh, see, I hate it. The people, they wait till the last minute to dial in. You want to take somebody else if they call in, or you got to go?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go. Right
on. Again, Alexandra Natapoff, thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us. Thoroughly enjoyed the book, very informative, and we'll be looking out for some of your future work.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
For sure. Has anyone ever thought that you were not white? Just curious.
Sometimes.
Okay. I thought that too. Groovy, thank you so much. Have a fantastic evening and continue the great work.
Thank you. Good night.
You too. Good night. Context of white supremacy. I thought that I saw some of her photos and I didn't know if we were going to have a white person or non-white person on the show. Very interesting. Anyway, we'll take a commercial break. We'll be right back. Context of white supremacy.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
Context of white supremacy, Gus T Renegade, and justice. Justice, did you have any thoughts about the guest?
I do not have any thoughts at this time, but it's getting pretty late for me, so I have to go to bed soon. And so everybody, good night, and thank you for everybody calling in.
Groovin', enjoyed it. We will speak with you soon. Rest well. Wow, very interesting program. Very interesting program. I have a thought or two I'd like to share, and then I'll open the phone lines for the folks who called in if you are interested in sharing your views on what was on the program. The term fair. I hope for people who are listening in who are new to the program, that term, fair, man, it's becoming a hallmark of the cows. It should not be used. It should not be used. F-A-I-R. It should not. If you want to think who's the fairest of them all. If you want to think My Fair Lady, the word, if you look in the dictionary, it means white, it means light, it means just, reasonable, correct, accurate. You do not want to use a term that equates being white with being just, beautiful, reasonable, or accurate. I mean, this is hallmark coding of racism, white supremacy. I asked our guest before the program began, before we went live, I asked her if she would not use the term fair, and I didn't even have to explain it. She already understood. Fair, light, white, just, yep, that makes sense. Yep, I won't use it. She agreed. That's why I just kept saying you broke our agreement, because she said she wasn't going to say the term. I knew it was going to be a problem for her. She uses the term fair more than Terry Kelleher, the white gay man who was on the program. I believe he is an admitted racist. I might be incorrect, but I think he admitted to being a racist on the program. He did. Admitted racist and admitted so-called homosexual, Terry Kelleher. He used the term man a lot on that program. It got, kind of ridiculous. I think he said it at least 8 times. In her book, she uses this term so much, and it was glaring. It was glaring because this is a book that is ostensibly about justice, or injustice, really, to be truthful. But the term fair was used so much. I just want to give you an example of it, and I hope you will pay attention as I'm reading. I hope it will become clear for people who are new, who are listening, who haven't quite grasped it yet. For older listeners, if you still haven't really caught what is incorrect about using the term fair, I hope you'll listen to where the term is used. Context. Okay. U.S. attorneys may inform suspects that they are potential targets of an investigation, or even sometimes ask the court to appoint counsel so that the suspect can discuss his or her options with a lawyer, and so the process of cooperation can proceed fairly and smoothly, making counsel available to cooperating offenders and making sure that defendants who already have lawyers consult them would likewise improve the fairness and regularity of the process. To be clear, the realities of street and drug crime differ significantly from white-collar investigations, and the interpolation of counsel into the now routine dynamic between police and sex would be disruptive. It would mean that at some point, police could no longer get quick, informal information from suspects who fear arrest or criminal charges. It might mean that fewer suspects would cooperate and more might end up being charged with crimes. The point at which counsel is made available would have to be early enough to make a difference in the quality of information provided and the fairness of the negotiation, but not so early as to hamstring police in their investigative functions. Nevertheless, courts, legislatures, and prosecutors' offices should make counsel available to avoid the irregularity, inaccuracy, and unfairness that plague direct negotiations between suspects and the government. The need for counsel is particularly strong for high-risk cooperating suspects. For example, those who are asked to engage in violent or otherwise risky operations, or suspects whom the government may ultimately use at trial. Vulnerable informants raise hard problems. They are more subject to coercion, less likely to be able to make good decisions on their own behalf, and as a result, more likely to enter into bad deals or to get hurt as a result of their cooperation. For these reasons, their information may also be more unreliable. Pressuring vulnerable suspects to cooperate can also be unfair or, in some cases, deadly for the informant. I'll stop there, but I mean, that term, I mean, it was just flying off the page like fair. And again, this is supposed to be a book about justice. In my view, the term should not be used. You want to stick with reasonable, correct, depending on the context that you're talking about. Tater Pie corrected me. I wouldn't even use it to talk about skin color. I wouldn't even say someone has fair skin, because you are still equating skin color and what is called white skin color. You are still equating that with beauty or lightness, correctness, justice. So I wouldn't even do that. I would use the term pale if I was talking about someone being their skin complexion. I would say pale, not fair. But yeah, really pay attention to that term. And just that term, this highlighted for me reading. Man, reading, I cannot encourage folks to read. I'm not saying that just reading a book is going to solve all of our problems. Although Kush the Black Unifier, on his first visit to the program, he did say we could read books. He was talking about black people. He said we could read our way out of this. He did say that. I'm not saying that, but I am saying reading, man, it's so fundamental in just helping you to think. This interview would have been totally different. I think Alexandra Natapoff, she's white. Even though she did, very interesting, she did say that sometimes people think she's not white. If we'd had more time, that would have been great to spend more time on that, particularly how she knows when those times are that people don't think she's white. Real interesting. But she's white. I mean, she's white. That should be enough said. Very informed. She's a professor of law. Very informed white woman. I do think she shared a lot of good information, but I also think she practiced a lot of racism. I was almost on the floor. I mean, if it had been me asking questions, I would have interrupted her, but I don't interrupt when Justice asks questions. When Justice asked her, how do white people, or I think it was why, either how or why, white people withhold information from non-white people? And she said, I don't think I'm qualified to answer that question. Man, this white, number one, she said she was white. Any question about the behavior of white people, anytime you ask a white person, you have asked someone who should be qualified to give you an answer. Like, they don't have to speak for all white people, but at least as someone that says, hey, I'm on the team, I can at least give you my perspective as a member of the team. That's number one. She said she was white. Number two, she wrote a whole book about how, at the core of this snitching thing, a big part of the problem is information. When you use these informants or snitches or whatever we want to call them, a lot of times white people don't write this information down. As it plays out on the streets for many a black person, there is no paper trail. They just stop a black person on the corner. You want to go to jail or do, X, Y, and Z. That's the way it plays out. There is no paper trail for that. So she has a lot of information in her book about how white people withhold information. But even forget all that. We just, like before Justice asked her that question, Professor Natapoff and myself just had a conversation about, hey, it's lots of black people and non-white people who are being harmed by the so-called criminal justice system. Even though the laws don't say anything explicitly about racism, white supremacy, and harming non-white people, the end result is that overwhelmingly non-white people are being brutalized by this system. That's what's happening. A few years ago, it was blatant Jim Crow. She said the pillar of Jim Crow, and she said that got stripped away, and now we have so-called colorblind language. That is exactly what we're talking about. White people practicing racism, white supremacy, concealing information, using words. Exactly what we're talking about. In fact, she's got examples of it all throughout her book. Part of the code to switch to welfare queen, crackheads, the new code where you can talk about black people without talking about them, urban areas. I think she used a lot of those code words. That is the new way that white people withhold information about we are in a system of white supremacy, but we're not going to use words that reveal that. Real slick with the way she practiced racism. That was why I wanted to talk more. That was why I talked more during the latter portion of her visit and read more from her book, because you could just go right through her book and pick out information. I mean, this story about this Rachel Hoffman, a white woman dies being used as a snitch, and white people go crazy. They put her on 20/20. Are you crazy? This dainty, that almost fair. They said dainty. This dainty, fragile white woman, how dare you put her in a situation that's supposed to be reserved for black people, like Katherine Johnston, 92-year-old black female, gunned down in her house, and then they sprinkle marijuana on her? Man. At any rate, before I hit the phone lines, I also wanted to make sure I didn't really want to focus on the compensation aspect of the program. I know Mr. Nero had a great question about that. I didn't want to focus on that. I didn't really want to focus on the numbers of so-called snitches. What I really wanted to stand out is the effect that this so-called snitching, this program of getting black people to give information on other black people so that they will be subjected to reduced punishment from white people, enforcement officers. The effect of this is that it further creates conflict and confusion amongst black people, and they know that's going to be the effect of this. I hadn't really heard Gus before. At least to me, it was really revealing reading that in her book, and that was why I really wanted to focus on that. And I just want to read this paragraph again to really illustrate what I'm saying. I think white people are very shrewd in the way that they practice racism, white supremacy, and they know they can create an environment where black people don't trust each other. Everybody thinks that they're out to get one another. How many programs have you heard where people are calling folks agents? You've heard it on this program. They know that. They know things will never even get off the ground because, man, they will be tied up accusing each other and looking out and backstabbing and this, that, and the. I mean, all of that works for them. It's a part of their plan. I just want to read. This is on page 101, and I want to make sure, even though you have heard on this program people accused of being an agent, at no time have I ever said that anyone was an agent. At no time. I will say again, though, Irritated Genie, Ayo Kamathi, is an admitted employee for Homeland Security. But on page 101, and these aren't even her words, very clear, these aren't even her words, but it speaks exactly to the point. Dr. Jerome Miller, no single tactic of law enforcement has contributed more to violence in the inner city than the practice of seeding the streets with informers and offering deals to snitches in quotes. Relying on informers threatens and eventually cripples much more than criminal enterprise. It erodes whatever social bonds exist in families, in the community, or on the streets. Loyalties, which in the past kept violence within bounds. They know this sort of program promotes violence, conflict, and confusion amongst non-white people. She even has this in her book where she talks about how this promotes violence. She has all kinds of terrible examples of someone was alleged to have snitched on a person and non-white people went and raped the person's girlfriend, and just terrible story. I mean, totally destroys the fabric of a quote-unquote community. That's really what I hope people don't miss that point. If there's other great information that you got, outstanding, fantastic, but I hope everyone catches that. I think the primary objective of this is to create confusion, conflict, and distrust amongst non-white people. That's the primary goal, and I think the way to get out of that, number one, do not snitch. And when we say snitch, I'm going to give the codified definition for snitch: to willfully and deliberately volunteer information about a person or persons with the specific intention of gaining direct or indirect personal favors and or praise from racists. That's what I mean when I say snitching. Do not participate in that. And I think I said that on the first roundtable. Don't hang around people who are doing criminal things. Those folks will be exactly what she says in the book. They will be pressured to give information to white people. So you probably don't want to hang around people that are doing criminal activity. You heard, high probability they fall into that high probability snitch group. Not saying that they are, but I mean, those are the people that white people tend to put pressure on, more pressure on in the system of white supremacy, particularly if they are a black male. Let's see, yeah. The non-white bit, I wanted to put the video up. She was on C-SPAN's Book TV, Professor Natapoff, talking about her book. And I wanted to put that up, but they blocked the feed, so I couldn't embed it. So I put a YouTube video up so you could see her. If you look online, maybe I'll switch. I'll take this video down and I'll put up a picture where she looks a little bit more, quote unquote, racially ambiguous. So you can see her. She looks, I could see where some white people might see her and say, oh, I don't think she's a white person. She has an interesting name too. It would have been real cool if she had more time with us to kind of get some more about her background and her parents, if both of her parents are classified as white. And as I said, the times when she is not accepted as white, how does she know people are not accepting her as white? Would have been real interesting to get that information. But I felt it was more important to focus on the snitching. I felt that was really important to get that out. I will go to the phone lines now. We have 2 minutes left in the live feed. If you are interested in listening and or talking, you should call in right now. The number is 347-215-6071. Again, the number is 347-215-6071. You should not wait till the last minute if you might need me to Skype you in on the line. Probably don't want to wait till the last minute because I might not be able to do it. And if you called in and you think you want to talk, you should probably press 1 now so that your line will be open in case my switchboard crashes or white people do something crazy. Wait a minute. I was asked a question. I got to answer this question. I was asked this question by an investor, so I have to do this because I was supposed to do this yesterday. I was asked, let's see, forgive me, I want to read the question exactly so I can answer it. Scrolling. Okay, here we go. Going to answer the question. After your experience with investments with the C.O.W.S program and getting the MacBook Pro, did it provide a strong challenge to Fuller's idea of asking white people for investments rather than non-white people? From a loyal listener, investor. She's pretty cute too. I'm actually going to take a moment and think. I will open the phone lines. There are a lot of people who have a hand up to call in, so I don't want to have to keep prompting about the volume. I would like us to codify that. If you're going to call in and participate on the show, you should be in a quiet area. Use your mute button if you are not talking. I shouldn't be hearing the television or dishes and all that stuff. Just use your mute button. Real simple. It's not hard. Just use your mute button. I'm going to go to the phone lines. If you called in, your line is open. Please keep the background noise down. Thank you kindly.
Gus.
Yes, ma'am.
I was going to ask you, did she explain what's the difference between a confidential informant and a snitch, the legal definition of the two?
Say that one more time.
Did she give a legal definition of a confidential informant and a snitch, if there's a difference in the legal definition between those two?
She did not. I know in her book it changes. She talked in the book about how some regions, cities, locales, what have you, some states, they have different definitions for an informant. So I think it changes depending on where you are. Like white people make different rules depending on what part of the world you're in, because she talked about how what gets defined, how they define an informant, quote unquote, how they define that has big ramifications. So I don't think it's not standardized. It's not standardized, and I don't think she made a differentiation between the two.
Okay. But I was just curious, as you she said with a no-knock warrant, because it seems that these type of warrants are only issued for non-white areas. You don't hear about no-knock warrants in white areas, even in trailer parks. You don't hear that they show up with a no-knock warrant and they're kicking in people's doors and trying to drag out this white man who was cooking up meth in his lab in his trailer with his babies and everyone sitting around inhaling that stuff. You don't hear about things like that happening, but you hear about it always happening in non-white areas. Like with the Ayanna Jones situation in Detroit, that was a no-knock warrant. They just came in there, kicked the door down, and threw in one of those flashbang grenades.
Can I be heard?
Yes, I can hear you. Is this 909?
Yes, greetings.
Hey, greetings.
I seen this documentary where this dude, he went to the Appalachian Mountains and he was taking a picture of them white people from Appalachia. And the white people they're mad at this, he put out these books, these picture books of these pictures. And what it is, they were mad because they were saying that, you showing, you're disgracing these families and whatnot. They didn't appreciate white people being depicted in that manner. They called them a traitor and all kind of things, you know what I'm saying? So what it is that they go in there and they do all that raiding of those meth labs and whatnot, but they don't want to put that on TV because it doesn't benefit them. So they put on all the crack, the crack dealers and black, Mexican, non-white people because it benefits them. So that's basically what's going on.
And you're right about it, because when in the 80s, when they had that stuff going on in Miami, where these people were flying planes and bringing in all of these drugs into the area, it was ran by whites, or these so-called Cubans who classify themselves as white, or people treat them as being white people. They had access to all the resources. They had the planes, the boats, and they were doing these things. But all you were seeing was the low-level blacks and other non-whites that they were being doing the perk walks. It's the same way they're doing with these Hispanics and these trucks, where they say they're trucking in all of these marijuanas and whatever, bringing it in by tractor trailers through the states. But how are they getting it through over here? The DEA and all these other agencies, I'm sure that they have a cut and they know what's being done, because they know this stuff is moving. And it's upper level so-called people who call themselves white. They're making a big profit in it because they are using their trucking and their planes to bring these things in. When Escobar was at his height, when he was running things in Central America, they were on his payroll. That's how it was coming in.
Yeah, I think it was interesting that she kind of went out of her way to say she was a scholar and then she was using like buckets and buckets of words, and the interview was becoming kind of annoying until Gus slowed her down and said, "Can we make this a dialogue?" And then I think it became interesting.
I wanted to bop her, man. I was listening. I really was like having to be patient, when she was just practicing racism, white supremacy. I really was annoyed. I felt like she was blatantly practicing racism, white supremacy. Even the whole way through her book, I wanted to tell her, her book would have really confused me if I did not understand racism, white supremacy as a total system, because she's talking about white supremacy every page, but she's not using the term white supremacy. Fairness is on every page, but racism, white supremacy is not being used that often. She was saying the criminal system, and all these other terms. She has a case. If I had had more time with this book, the show would have probably been much better if I had just done this show by myself as a book review. Because dig through I really enjoyed reading this book, reading the footnotes, really investigate. She has a footnote for this is a case in Virginia, my neck of the woods. Man claims he broke into garage, was police informant. This is I'm reading it from the Virginian Pilot. The case against accused cop killer Ryan Frederick, he's a suspected white person, relies partially on the accounts of burglars who may have been working as confidential police informants. A 21-year-old Chesapeake man said he and another informant broke into Frederick's garage in the Portlock section of the city in January to look for evidence of a marijuana growing operation and told the police about what they found there. In an interview at the Chesapeake Correctional Center, Ronaldo Turnbull Jr., black male, told the Virginian Pilot that he had been working with police for several months before the shooting of Detective Gerard Shivers. Turnbull said Shivers was among the police officers he had provided information to. It goes on to give more information about the case. The thing, I would not have picked up on this at all. I don't even think I would have been interested enough to follow the footnote through to the newspaper article that reports all this. In the book, she doesn't give any racial information about Ronaldo Turnbull or anyone in this case. When you dig a little deeper, so this is a black male that police told to go break into someone's house, and this someone ultimately shot and killed an enforcement official. Now, just think about that. Police sends you to go rob someone who's willing to shoot and kill not just anyone, but willing to shoot and kill an enforcement officer. That's what I mean about this is designed just to practice racism, white supremacy, to put non-white people in positions where it will increase conflict, confusion, and violence against black people, non-white people. Just little things like that, the way her book is written, it's coded. Like the Colum family. She doesn't reference them as black people, but she does reference them. They're charged with a crack cocaine operation, a white code for black people. If you can't pick out that racist code, you really would get confused and think that racism is just a minor part of this story or a serious problem, and not the entire part of this story is racism, white supremacy.
You're right. Hello, Gus. Hello.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Hi. I was interested in knowing what the maximum benefit of snitching was. Did she talk about that at all? Because, if these people are snitching and still coming out of the experience as felonies, that's like insult upon injury. If you're not even getting the benefit of not coming out of this with that felony charge, that's just ridiculous.
She talks about that in the book, how some people, they get money, they get drugs, they get greatly reduced charges or no charges. She talks about that in the book. But, it doesn't paint the image, is very sad. It just shows you how vulnerable and weak black people are in the system of white supremacy, where these people most often are coming to the table in a very vulnerable position without legal representation, charges stacked against them, plea bargains. That's how a lot of this stuff happens. Just being black in a system of white supremacy is
right.
Katherine Johnston. Katherine Johnston.
Right, and I'm saying they're coming to the table defenseless, and they're leaving the table defenseless because, we have this great number of black males with these felony charges unable to get, certain jobs, if jobs at all. This thing continues to follow them, 30 years on, from 30 years old on. So, like you were saying before, the whole effect of this on, communities or neighborhoods, at large is forever.
Yeah, it's a one-way street. I mean, they don't want to give them enough information that they could become like double agents, where they can go back to their team and tell them like, this is what's going on. This is what these white people are doing. This is how they're setting us up. So yeah, it's a very one-way street. And
yeah, what difference does it make if you've gotten a reduced time, but then you come out here and you still can't function?
If you come out, because
right.
if you go to prison and known as a snitch, your chances are great that you're not coming out. Because somebody will shank you in there and put you away.
I mean, I remember reading this quote. It said I liked it, but it was kind of weird. But it said it's hard for an empty bag to stand upright. Basically saying that, these people are extremely vulnerable. I mean, if you're poor, somebody offers you some money, and you're starving, somebody offers you some food. It's like, you're not gonna be in the right state of mind to try to do any type of bargaining. You have no bargaining chips. You have, you're just, and that's what that basic quote was saying, is that these people are extremely vulnerable, like babies. That's how I see it, man. Like, it's babies it's like taking candy from a baby. A baby and an adult, it's just, there's no challenge there.
No, there isn't. That's why in certain professions, they run a background check on you and they run a credit check, because if you have liabilities out there where you can be bribed or you can be compromised, they will not hire you or put you in a position like that, because they know, based on what's going on in your background, your chances are greater that you're going to turn over information to make a profit.
So what are we supposed to do? What do you got? Anyone suggest that we do, considering our baby-like state?
As Gus stated, stay away from criminals and do not get involved in criminal activities, because we know our chances are greater that we are going to go down for the count. That young man in Minneapolis that they said was a terror suspect that was supposed to blow up some building, that man was pretty much coerced the whole way. The FBI and everyone else, they pretty much pushed him, supplied him pretty much with everything for him to blow up this mall or whatever it was that he was supposed to be trying to blow up a few months back. The same thing they did with those people in Newberry, New York, where they said these black non-whites, they were alleged to be Al-Qaeda operatives, and they were trying to do terrible things to the government. They come to find out they had an informant that this man was moving around the country, and he pretty much went in there and was doing these things, and the government was paying this man money. He forgot how many, over $500,000 he was paid trying to entrap people.
Can I be heard?
Yes, we're here. We're hearing you.
Okay, good evening. Has anybody noticed, I guess, kind of a trend with a bunch of white authors? I mean, I haven't read a lot of their books, but just from the parts that Gus reads, how they can be real thorough. And, of course, they're cunning with words. Like she was saying earlier, she was trying to equate the reason that the system is against, she said the weaker I think elements in society or something, and it's like, no, it's, you know, the non-white people, and just basically trying to minimalize, you know, the fact that it happens so regularly, like Gus says, and I think like in the literature they're real thorough, you know, like or in their lectures, Tim Wise, you know, all these authors, all these white authors, but then whenever you talk to them, it's like they back off it a little bit, and that's when the buckets of words, they come into play. And I just thought that's kind of a trend now. I mean, I don't know. I might be wrong. Am I the only one picking that up?
Well, it's practicing deceit. That's all it is. They're going to cover their tracks. They're going to give you a little bit of good information, and then they're just going to lead you on a wild goose chase, have you run around chasing your tail.
Yeah, I think she said social vulnerability, but the question is what creates that vulnerability?
And it's a cop-out, too, because they can say, well, you know, it's not explicit, it's implicit. And, you know, I think when non-white people start questioning that, they kind of, I guess, I don't know if they get surprised or whatever, or, you know, it's like you're not supposed to have been able to understand that code. But, yeah, it's deception.
Most of us don't understand that code. I'm going to mute myself really quick. I wouldn't have picked up on that. Most of us don't understand that the code that white people use, like the white enforcement officers that put this marijuana on a 92-year-old black female that they shot in her own home. Mm-hmm. They understand this. We can do this. This might work. As nutty as this look, 92-year-old person, we shot them in their own home, and we'll just sprinkle some. I mean, marijuana. You shoot and kill somebody over marijuana. This might work because it's a black female. Like, no way did they try something like that with a white person. And in fact, the guest, that's why I couldn't really go like bop her, because I think she did have constructive information. Professor Natapoff, she said, if that had been a black man, we might not, if that had been a black male, it is likely that we might not know anything about this story. That's racism, white supremacy. That's what it's designed to produce. And I would have totally missed that if I had not been more informed about racism, white supremacy in reading her book. Because, in her book, she's not really, unless you understand white supremacy, you will walk right over it. She'll do exactly what she did on the program, just use a lot of words that take you away from the truth of the matter. But like in her book, if you understand white supremacy, it's blatant. Like, you can't even make a statement to say that white people are not doing this purposely. She has in her book, it's standard practice for enforcement officers to withhold information. They have a public set of records, private set of records. She details all this in her book. This is conscious behavior. To put marijuana on a 92-year-old black female, this is conscious behavior. I'll mute my mic.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to imply. Like, based off of the, the plethora of information that they give, because of course they have access to it. It seems as though when they actually write down this information, it seems as though based off of the way they act, at least on this show, that they're possessed of something when they're writing this, that something else is controlling them. And, when they come on here, it's like, oh, well, yeah, it's like that, but it's only because it's the poor people or, the weaker people, but they'll say anything but white supremacy and accountability, what I'm saying? There's just a disposition to not, overstand accountability. I'm sorry for cutting someone off.
I was just going to add, hello, everyone. I was just going to add that everything you guys are saying reminds me of the good cop, bad cop scenario. The refinement of white supremacy almost requires that they have white people who operate as though they're fighting for justice. You've got white authors, so-called white anti-racist activists, I believe that it's necessary for black people to think that they are good white people. Because if black people did not believe they were good white people, black people would wake up a lot sooner. So I think it's a matter of more confusion, a lot of different voices in the matrix. And so you have these white people who are in these justice organizations. White supremacy locks you up. White anti-racist activists free you after 10, 15, 25 years. And at the end of that, after that end of that unjust incarceration, you're now grateful to white people because of other white people that lock you up unjustly. Mm-hmm. So it keeps the victims in a state of confusion. That's why a lot of black people, they put these shows on, pretending to care about black people, like the CNN Black in America, or, you know, these black people who are profiled as adopting black children, or these white people that are having these like the African these showcase of where these people raise money for African
feed the hungry.
Right. So they have to have these different little scenarios, I think, in front of us to keep us confused. Because if you realize that all the cops are bad cops, you're not going to cooperate. You know, you're going to have a whole different mentality that's going to develop, and that's going to be a survival mentality. But when you are convinced that there are good white people, you're going to break your neck to try not to believe what's right in front of you. So I think it's all these authors, particularly if they won't talk about white supremacy, then what the hell are they talking about then? Why are you telling me anything at all if you're not going to define and identify and expose the very system that you're writing about? So what is your purpose?
Thank you.
Well, they make money.
They
make money doing it. I mean, a black person can write the same book and not get published and not make any money. There's money to be made in writing about the pathologies in the black community. Right. They make money.
And
they make money writing the books. They make money speaking.
Right. Mm-hmm.
You know, they make money telling you what your problems are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're basically pimping white supremacy. Or should I say pimping the victims of white supremacy. Right. So
I think they're very dangerous.
Oh, absolutely, because they're confusing.
Especially for people who are just trying to get out of being white identified. Mm-hmm. As soon as they'll come into contact with these people, they'll go right back to it. Oh, well, here comes some good white people, you know, just like you said.
Mm-hmm. The holy white savior.
A prime example was that there's a show that Gus did with a black female who said she was related to J. Edgar Hoover, and she was on with a former FBI agent. And he kept going back to the point of reference that he got Geronimo Pratt out of jail, or he played some role in that. And Gus couldn't even get a question in with the guy without her butting in and just basically trying to cover for him in some kind of way. So
you're right, because she was saying, he worked on his case for over 18 years to get him out, but y'all put him in there in the first place.
Exactly. But he's got to be grateful to white people for other white people locking him up. So you ever notice when they interview these people after they've been locked up for 10, 15, 25, 20 years, and they ask them, well, you know, how do you feel? Are you bitter? And they always say no. Because now they owe their so-called freedom to white people. I mean, what a horrible position to be in, to be a victim of racism, and then to be given your quote-unquote freedom after 25 years of incarceration. And now people want to know if you're bitter.
I would say I'm bitter every day. I say every day I look up, and all the 30 years that I lost, I'm bitter about it because I know with Barry Scheck, he have that justice program where he goes around exonerating people. One of OJ's former attorneys.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then what confusion is it for every day that somebody's fighting for you, you're looking at these white people in their faces, and they're fighting for you. How can you therefore have an honest, realistic assessment of white supremacy when now you're in a position where you got to be grateful? That's a horrible position, you know.
One of the conditions of most of these people being exonerated is that they have to put it in writing that they agree that they're not going to publicly speak out against those individuals, because if they do, then they're going to be placed right back in prison.
What? I seriously doubt that, because I don't see why. If my DNA prove didn't do the crime, why do I have to sign a disclosure or a disclaimer saying I'm not going to speak about it? I have the right to be bitter. I was locked away for 30 years. I should be saying until the day I die I could say whatever the heck I want to say.
Yeah. I know an individual personally who was freed after 19 years, and this is what he shared with me, that they let him know that if you go out there running your mouth too much, you can just as easily end up right back in here.
And they could do that very easily. All they'd have to do is called rearrest you.
Right.
Set you up for a crime. It's real easy to lock a black person up.
He was doing 25 years to life, and after 19 years, they exonerated him, if you will, and allowed him to get his freedom. And it was made very clear to him that he could just as easily end up right back where he was.
And they could do it.
Well, you know what? I will be packing my bags and heading to a country that does not have an extradition treaty with the U.S., and I will be singing like a parrot. I would say whatever the heck I want to say, move to Cuba or wherever, where I cannot be extradited.
Well, one thing after 25 years, particularly of unjust incarceration, you're so institutionalized, you're not even the same person anymore. You know, you might wind up broken in there. Because I can't even imagine being locked up for 25 years for something I know I didn't do. You know,
well, that's what Geronimo Pratt did. He packed his bags and he went off to Tanzania.
Okay. Yeah.
But even with that, when you have this number of black males in the community unable to function as men, this is how you get the Katherine Johnsons and the Eleanor Bumpers, 20 years ago in New York, where you have these white men killing grandmas with no repercussions at all. I mean, what do we do about that?
Well, I don't know, but I do think. I'm sorry.
I mean, Eleanor Bumpers was, she was, I don't know, 80-something or overweight.
What was her case about anyway? I heard her
name.
They
said she had knives. A SWAT team had to shoot an elderly, overweight woman with knives.
Because they claim that she
and then you have
with the knife.
You talking about the lady from Atlanta?
No, in New York.
Oh, New York. Okay.
I actually have a short description of her in the book. She was shot and killed by Atlanta police after they break through a burglar bar entry door and wooden door to conduct a drug raid at her home. So I'm assuming that they broke into her house. She may not even know who it was. She might have picked up the knife like anybody else would have if somebody breaks the door down.
She didn't. She had no idea of who it was. Right. She went and grabbed her pistol to protect. And I know that neighborhood she lives in. That the neighborhood is you know what I'm saying? It's a rough neighborhood.
Yeah.
And anybody, if I'm in the house right now and somebody breaks my door down, my first thought isn't going to be it's the police.
Exactly.
But one thing I did want to share with you guys is, if you really look at the benefits of citizenship, being a non-citizen, you really have no rights or protections whatsoever. So I suspect that this possibly explains some of the brutality against black people that goes unpunished. We're really not citizens. So therefore, we're not due the protection of the government or due the same so-called rights as citizens. I mean, I don't know if that's a legitimate conclusion or not, but it seems to fit when you look at the way black people are treated. We have no rights that they have to respect. We have no protections under the law.
You're right.
It kind of adds more weight to the theory that people who descended from slaves are not citizens.
You're right, because look what they did with the 14th Amendment. They took over the 14th Amendment and the incorporated businesses could take a part of. They're all included in that because that's what they used the Citizens United. It was based on the 14th Amendment, and that was supposed to be for the former slaves. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment was written primarily for former slaves. But everyone else has taken over it and have pretty much write you completely out of it.
Well, one thing about the 14th Amendment, it was never, in my opinion, never constitutionally ratified because it did not have 3/5 of the vote of the states that were present then to ratify it. 3/5 of the states did not vote affirmative. So what happened was the Congress rammed it through. So that 14th Amendment, that so-called overturned the Dred Scott decision that said that slaves can never be citizens, if the 14th Amendment is not constitutional, and I don't think it is, then the Dred Scott decision still stands, which means that anyone who was a slave or descendant from slaves can never be citizens. So the 14th, matter of fact, to add a little weight to that, Ohio, the state of Ohio, you can Google this, I believe in 2003 the state of Ohio finally ratified the 14th Amendment. So why would a state even bother to ratify a 14th Amendment in the 21st century if it was already constitutional?
You have a very valid point there.
Okay, I'm sorry. Hello?
Yes.
Okay, so what productivity in us saying that we're not citizens and yet we're subject to the so-called laws of this land when it affects us negatively?
I'm sorry, what was the first part of your question?
I said, what is the productivity of us saying citizens and yet we're subject to the laws of this country? I mean, we have upwards of 2 million men in prison.
Yeah.
Well, the best answer I could give to that, for me personally, when I started researching the whole citizenship thing on the heels of Katrina, how they kept insisting on calling black people refugees, and the AP, the Associated Press, and the New York Times, when they were challenged about that, they said they called it as they saw it. Then when I look at the whole question, what it did for me, accepting the fact that I was not a citizen, it clarified a lot of things for me. It made me say, whew, I knew something was wrong. So what it did for me was it gave me the freedom, the freedom from laboring under the delusion of being a citizen and wondering why I was being mistreated because I'm a citizen. And it took that away, that delusional state, that is what Paul Mooney calls the illusion of inclusion.
That's right.
And I think people are always better off. I felt better because to me it made me say, okay, if I'm not a citizen, this explains a whole lot of things that didn't make sense to me before. For example, the Voting Rights Act. Why does a citizen need a Voting Rights Act? Why do black people need a Voting Rights Act that has to be renewed if they're citizens? Why do we need a Civil Rights Act of 1875 or 1964? So to me it offers clarity. I think black people personally need to be very comfortable with hard truth, because that hard truth will liberate the hell out of us. As long as we labor under a false illusion, we will keep on asking why, what's happening. But once you accept the fact, and it can be a little painful at first, my feelings are not hurt by not being a citizen. I'm cool with that because I wasn't treated like a citizen to begin with. So once I realized I may not be a citizen, I'm like, cool, let me move on and find out what the hell I really am. So I think that's a liberating moment for black people to finally look at this system and accept it for what it is. That's what I think the productivity is. Black people will stop laboring under delusions.
You have a point, because that law that they're pushing in Arizona, where they want to tell people that if you have a child, if you are a non-citizen and you have a child, which is targeting towards the so-called non-white people who call themselves Hispanic Mexican, that if they come across the border and they have a child on the American, they call them anchor babies, in order to secure themselves in the United States, that child would still not be given citizenship, that child would be considered to be a citizen of Mexico or whatever country that they come from. But the United States, if they could travel throughout the world, and if one parent is an American, so-called American, and they give birth in any countries in the world, that child is considered to be a citizen of the United States, even though that child was not born on U.S. soil. But for the white people, they can go anywhere, give birth, and they are still an American, could get an American passport, but they are trying to tell anyone else non-white, if you come in here, you have a baby, we are not going to give you that citizenship status. You're going to have to go back to whatever country your parents came from because you're not one of us.
Yeah. I personally don't think any non-white person is truly a citizen. But, the one thing that's missing from black people being so-called citizens is one more thing I would add. Everybody who is a citizen who is not already termed a citizen has to go through a formal naturalization process. Mm-hmm. When slaves were so-called liberated, they never went through any kind of process. So how did they go from being a slave person to a citizen without a formal naturalization process? We didn't go through that.
They were already born here, 3 generations in.
Mm-hmm.
What I think about that is because we have this word that we're very comfortable with called freedom. And that's just being free to make dumb choices. I don't believe in freedom. Just let me be free. Let me be liberated. I think that freedom is an oxymoron, and it's like the word fair. It's one of those words that you hear so often that you actually think it's something that you have. When they say that we were emancipated, we weren't emancipated. We were given freedom, the opportunity to just make dumb choices. And that's what we've been doing ever since.
Yep.
I choose the term liberation or the term free because that recognizes and acknowledges that I've been incarcerated, that I've been victimized. I don't ever use the word freedom. It's not in my vocabulary.
Well, we weren't even liberated, so-called emancipated after 1865. We were still held under the black codes, the Jim Crow, the Reconstruction. So we've never really, and I would say this too, is nobody can give you freedom. And I think that's a mistake we make is not understanding the words of nobody can give you freedom. Just the fact that somebody says that you're equal, that you're free, you're not. Because they have the determination to decide that you have it or don't have it, which means you don't have it.
Mm-hmm. Take it back.
It's just, and I do apologize for saying the word hell, over and over again for using profanity. It's just that, man, sometimes it gets to you. It's just so much deception, and some people, when I told them we weren't citizens, I told different people when I explained why, they actually looked hurt. And I told them, you shouldn't be hurt. You should be relieved because that explains your condition. That explains why you're going through what you're going through. If you're not a citizen, now you can start to say, since I'm not a citizen, let me find out some other stuff that I've been lied to about. So it should be, in my opinion, truth should liberate you. Truth is supposed to be painful. And the problem is too many times we embrace the feel-good, and that's what gets us into trouble. But truth is a growth process. It's supposed to cause you to be uncomfortable and painful. That means you're growing.
May I ask a question from a previous show, Gus?
I reckon.
I wanted to ask the callers. There was a young man who called the other night, about 2 nights ago, the 29-year-old who had been married to the white female and had another white female also taking care of him, saying he was having a hard time with black females. And my question to the callers was, how many of us know black females whose father or parents are paying her rent and who's giving her money? How many of us know black females, a number of black females who are in a position where they don't have to worry about the financial status of anyone that they may seek to date?
I don't know anybody. Not.
I sure don't know.
Can you rephrase that question?
Excuse me.
Hello? Could a female caller rephrase?
Do you know any black females who are in a financial position to not be concerned with the financial position of a possible mate?
No. I don't know of anyone. We don't have it like that. We don't have a trust fund sitting out somewhere.
I don't know of any man or woman or male or female in that particular position. And I suspect that that's especially true for any non-white person.
Yeah, no, I don't know anyone either.
So when
Nor do I.
Right. So when the caller said he had been being supported by this white female and another white female, I guess, that he saw before her or along with her, I don't know.
Yeah, the one he was cheating with.
Right, right. And so apparently he didn't receive the same flack, at least based on finances, that he said he had received from black females. And I'm saying that I don't know many black females who are in a position to accept a black male who is not able to at least contribute. I don't know too many that are in a position to support a black male, certainly from the start of this supposed relationship.
And you should not want to be in a position like that, a man or a woman, to be dependent on someone else to feed you, keep a roof over your head, because one day you could come home and the doors, locks could be changed, your stuff sitting on the doorstep. Why would you want to put yourself as a man, even if you have to go and work at McDonald's or whatever the case might be? It's your money. You have a check coming in. It's going into your pocket. You don't have to go to this all-white female or whatever color she happens to be and ask her for money, because that is what these people, they like. They want to get you in a position, a vulnerable position like that, whereby they know you're dependent on them. You don't have nowhere to go.
I personally don't. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that one of the things that I think I can understand the points being made, but one of the things I think that further keeps black male and female, non-white male and females confused primarily is because they have a false sense of security about the income that they're bringing in. Because of white supremacy racism at any given moment, that can be snatched from any of us. So I think that the fact that we are, sometimes we don't want to acknowledge that fact and believe that we have control over something that we do not. So at any given time, both the non-white female and non-white male find themselves in the street.
Absolutely.
And I think that creates an anxiety and a pressure that oftentimes those who may not fully understand white supremacy racism, they're not willing to accept that, because you all of a sudden have been told that you don't have any control over anything, regardless of whatever quote-unquote accolades or education that you've received, or whatever praises that you've received from white people. So accepting that lie, accepting the fact that you have been misled, people don't want to do that. And one of the things I thought about was the fact that when the economy takes the turn that it's taken over the past few years, you have non-white males who have killed their entire family, children and wife. Like, how do I go home all of a sudden? Not this man that I've been misled to believe that I was in the first place, not understanding white supremacy racism. You know? That's right. And the lashing out began between confused non-white male and females about finance.
Actually, I do know a lot. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Pam. I
was just going to say that actually I do know quite a few women, black women, who are taking care of men who either not working because for whatever reason, so there are quite a few women out here who are taking care of them, and one of the main categories of black women that are doing that are called mama. So I find it very puzzling but it's all part of the media brainwashing to say that the white female is more supportive. What the white female is doing is she is basically keeping that black male, that non-white male, in an inferior status, in a childlike status, which makes her the powerful person. So many times what brothers mistake, or any non-white person, male or female, mistakes as support is really control. I mean, this white female, she can't control anything else, so she gets herself a non-white male. It doesn't have to be a black male, a non-white male that she can control. She has the purse strings, and so basically she's basically practicing white supremacy, only just in a different fashion. But the one thing I did want to add too was the supportive. And in our second book, we pretty much try to rip that myth apart that white females are more supportive. Because what's more supportive of a black man than someone fighting against his mistreatment? What's more supportive than that? And when you look at the organizations, when you look at the movements, when you look at Gina 6, when you look at all of the grassroots black organizations that are out there marching, protesting, sacrificing, financing, trying to save young black males, most of these organizations are funded, supported by black people. White females do not join these organizations. White female organizations have no involvement whatsoever in championing the civil rights or human rights of black males. So for somebody to think somebody is supportive because they allow them to lay up in the bed with them and they throw them a couple of bucks, they don't understand what supportive is.
I just wanted to hop in real quick because I didn't have the program for tomorrow programmed. We're supposed to have black males from the UK on the program tomorrow, thankfully. Skydrifter, he did videos for Cree 7 and myself there at YouTube. He's a black man. He's called in before. He understands racism, white supremacy. He's read Mr. Fuller's book. But he's been a long-time listener of the program, and he said it's 4 other black males all in the UK that wanted to speak about white supremacy and what they observe over there. So they'll be here tomorrow afternoon. The program will be at 4 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Central, and 1 p.m. Pacific. But really looking forward to hearing a group of black males talk about white supremacy in the UK. Man, that's crazy. I don't have any of the shows in, so I'll promote the upcoming shows since they're not in. That's tomorrow, which would be Thursday, February the 3rd. Friday, February the 4th, will be the return of a proud gay black man, in quotes. That'll be at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. He likes you. He'll be glad to hear from Pam.
Oh, I'm so glad you have him back. Oh man, I'm going to be listening to both shows tomorrow.
That's Friday.
Oh, Friday.
Yeah,
okay.
Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern. It'll be 8 p.m. for you, Pam. 8 p.m. for you on Friday.
Okay.
Saturday, Anthony Pryor, Slave Side of Sunday. He'll be back. Mike Vick, Brett Favre. Got a pedophile in the sex offender in the Super Bowl. We'll be talking about all that on Saturday. I don't remember the time. And Sunday, last year we had Dr. Welsing on. We went at the same time as the Super Bowl, and at the time it was a record for live listens. This Sunday we'll have Dr. Africa on the program, same time as the Super Bowl, so you can make a decision.
That's good.
6:30, so I guess that's 6:30 Eastern, 5:30 Central, 3:30 Pacific. Dr. Africa will be on the cows, and I think he'll be able to break down that fairy tale thing quite nicely. So none of those programs are in, but that's stuff that's coming down the road.
Excuse me, Gus, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes, ma'am.
The show that we were talking about, where the young black man was talking about not being able to deal with black women. Do you remember when that was, or what guest? Because I didn't.
It was 2 programs. The first one was on Saturday, January. It's taking my calendar a moment to load. Okay, the first one was on. It was at midnight. So I guess the first one technically was on Sunday, January the 30th at 12 a.m. That was the first one, and then this continued on, I guess that's Monday, January 31st at 12 a.m. That was the second show where it picked back up. And actually, the young man, I believe, is on the line with us now. Gentlemen, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Wasn't he also on the show After Moving Ninja? Because he was on that show as well. Because I thought he was on the one after.
He was also on the show where it wasn't that show, but he was on the show also early last week where he was talking about leaving his blackness at the door, and after leaving his blackness, he was smart and articulate and factual. We had a discussion about that too, so you can dig and pick up all that.
All right, this is heating up.
Well, just to answer that question that was posed earlier, if anyone knew of a black woman who was being taken care of financially by a father or an uncle or an older male black sibling, yes, I know plenty of them. And a lot of them like to wear that tag of strong black independent female who needed no man to take care of her or any of her finances. So it seems to be an oxymoron, but black men don't get a lot of credit for a lot of support that they either sacrifice or put on hold to get a job to support the family financially, or the father or the uncle who's working two jobs to put his daughter or his sons or both through school. Mm-hmm. So instead, you get that degree and you get that high-paying job, and all of a sudden you forgot about everybody who raised you. Like, you gave birth to yourself, you gave yourself that degree, you self-educated yourself, and you needed nobody, which that isn't the case. So, I mean, that's number one. And number two, in retrospect to support, when I mean support, I don't just mean laying up in somebody's bed and throwing a bunch of books. That's more than my relationship was, and that's more than what my marriage was too. It was about encouragement versus discouragement. It was about what I could and couldn't do, what my state of mind was, the directions of my thinking, everything. I mean, I just wasn't getting acceptance from any black females around me at that time. I'm not talking about in my immediate family. I'm talking about outside the family in everyday society. I would I noticed it today. Well, not today, but 2 days ago, I was at Borders, and I'm reading, and I'm hearing some jokes on my computer, and I smile. I look up and smile, and there was a white female smiling back. I didn't know what she was smiling for, but I guess I was just laughing at the joke. Now I look up and smile again at a different joke. I was listening to Paul Mooney, by the way, and I was looking at a black female. I was smiling at her, just to see who was around in the board, and she rolled her eyes at me, and it just shook her head, and I'm like, well, what was that? I kind of got a confused look on my face because I don't know where that came from. Mm-hmm. Is that good or bad? It was confusing, but it didn't exactly give me the notion that she was an approachable person for me. And maybe I was wrong. Maybe I interpreted that the wrong way in her view or in her mind. But it seems like a less welcoming response, and I get that all the time. And it's usually they just sizing me up and down. I mean, when you talk to me and get to know me, I'm a completely different person than what you see in front of your eyes. But like I said, my problem is I can't talk to anybody. I can only talk and get my ideas out and express my ideas, and then get feedback and things like that. I mostly got that from white females. That's
do you think that she might have been? Hey, you think that she might have been saying to herself, like, "What are you smiling about? You're a damn slave in this society." I mean, what's so funny? I mean, I was going to say that when a female speaks to me or smiles at me or anything, man, I consider it like very, like I'm lucky or something. I've hit the lottery so many times with black females. I ain't got no problem with black females because black males been punking out, man, from day one, just like Nellie Fuller said. So if you get anything from a black female, you need to consider yourself extremely lucky. And if she's not smiling at you because you smiling, she might be thinking, what the hell are you smiling for?
What?
Yeah, she might be wondering, what the hell are you doing sitting out there listening to Paul Mooney? And I'm using that white woman by listening to Paul Mooney and then turning around smiling at her like something's funny. So perhaps she didn't find Paul Mooney to be amusing.
May I ask?
Oh, go ahead.
May I ask what? I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
May I ask what it is? What salary do you consider to be a high-paying job?
Well, in my line of work,
in reference to these black women who you say are making these high salaries. What do you consider to be a high salary?
Probably about 70 to 80,000 a year, maybe even six figures.
Okay, and you're saying that you have encountered a lot of black women making $70,000 a year?
No. I've encountered a lot of women who have been put through school. I mean, because we never really talk about money, but we talk about school. So the black women that I have talked to, I do know that they're in school, and I do know that their parents and their family are helping them out to get a degree so they can get a high-paying job or a good-paying job. And most of the time they do wind up getting it, but I never hear from them again.
But I'm saying, do you think that there is a significant number of black women making $70,000?
Do I think there's a significant women? Yeah, I think not maybe that amount, that's a specific dollar amount, but I do think a significant amount of black women do and can get high-paying jobs more often than black men.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how many people there are on the line, but there are 4 minutes left in the live broadcast, and I didn't know if you all wanted to continue the dialogue or end. If you want to continue it, we could do that. I could make a.
Yeah, we want to address this new problem.
Okay. Okay.
It's just that he's raising something that I think we do need. Well, it would be nice to talk about it. Not attacking anybody, but just nice to really.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
No, my only point here is for us to understand that racism, white supremacy affects black males as well as black females, because sometimes it seems like these conversations go in a way that suggests that black women are not also under this rock.
Yeah, it's the way they pit us against each other. What I found interesting is the caller when you were talking about the white female is more receptive. What I find that I've noticed among black people, male and female, is we overlook the black people who are nice to us, and we only seem to really notice and internalize the black people who are not. There are plenty of white women that probably roll their eyes, that give you an unfriendly look, white males that give me an unfriendly look. But black people, to me, we seem to have a tendency to take some bad experiences with black people and stereotype each other. Whereas if a white person looks at a white person and roll their eyes, white people don't say that's the way white people are and black people are nicer to them. I'm saying it's all part of our conditioning. It's all part of our trauma, this thing of constantly stereotyping ourselves and each other. And I know what you're saying. I hear the same complaint from black men, but I, as a black woman, have also run into the same thing, where I'm a pretty friendly person, and I've gotten a cold shoulder from many black men. But what the system wants me to do then is to turn against myself and turn against black men and say, well, white men are nicer. But me being conscious, I know that's not